call the policy meeting to order. Ms. Kadetsky, could you call the roll?
Good morning. Ms. Melissa Mason,
Here.
Ms. Pat Bradford,
I am here.
Ms. Stephanie Crable.
All right, if we could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
There's a couple of things I'd like to talk about on the agenda.
Okay.
There's 9 new things on our agenda. Of those, A, 3320, 6340, and 6450. Should we combine those and talk about them all at one time since each one relates to the other one? That's my first question.
So the initial, when I initially placed policy 3320, just for clarification, when I initially placed 3320 on the agenda, that was after discussion with Dr. Faison and our previous attorney about making some changes. Another board member had brought some concerns from, I believe, a parent that had some questions that involved those other 2 policies. So there's no changes to those policies, but just a little bit of a conversation in regards to that.
Okay. There are 4 technology policies. Well, more than that, actually, if you look at the extra ones. I have grave reservations about doing that much today with no pre-discussion on it. And use of wireless communication devices is number G, the last one. We've just taken input on cell phones, and so I'm not in a position to really deliberate on that today. So I'm giving you my concerns.
Okay.
Is there anything here that can be held?
I think that that's a possibility, but I do want to give Ms. Brinson, she and I had the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation about all of these policies a few weeks ago. And so I want to give her the opportunity to kind of explain, and we can kind of decide from there if that is all right with you.
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay.
So second?
All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes 2-0. All right. I'm going to make a motion to approve the minutes. And there's
Second.
2 sets of minutes. So
Yes.
Both sets of minutes.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Passes 2-0. All right. Let's get right into it. Dr. Faison, school trips.
All right. So I am bringing the field trip policy. Sorry, turned it off. I am bringing the field trip policy to the board for some changes. If you recall, we did a survey of our teachers and principals last year to ask about board field trips, and that is the thing that we're focusing on with the school trip or field trip policy. And what we found was that our teachers and principals really enjoyed the board field trips because they provided transportation, but they wanted more autonomy on what field trips they could take. A lot of the field trips that they would probably take are still some of the ones that were on the list for board field trips. And then the board expressed the interest to make sure that teachers and principals had the autonomy to do that as well. So in the new language, what we've done is basically we have shared that they can take a field trip, grades 1 through 5, and we will pay for the transportation of the field trip of their choice. Okay? With that, we are providing a suggestion list. This list came from our teachers, we surveyed them, and you will note that the suggestion list that we have, it is the same field trips that were on the board, suggested field trips, but they also added some. So like Mason Borough Island, the planetarium, Starbase, they added some additional field trips, but we had the same thing. But the biggest thing is this is a suggestion, okay? So the teachers get to make sure they have the autonomy to select all of the field trips that they go on. The other piece to this is we also, the board also paid for field trips for the arts in grades 1, 4, and 5. So they would continue to do that as well. So that is with the policy, and then I'll address a couple of things that I know one of our board members had asked me to address. But I'll go ahead and.
Go ahead. I can't remember what I asked you.
No, it wasn't,
Well,
it
some of
wasn't you, it was
Ms.
someone
Craybill
else.
had questions
Ms.
as
Craybill
well.
has sent in some questions.
I do have a question.
Okay.
Some of us were at the county yesterday, and the airport, what's the right word, foundation is doing an incredible field trip where they take the children to the airport, they examine our airport, they put them on a plane, take them to another city, out of state, and is that one of our field trips? Is that on our list?
No, that is actually part of our CLDA program, our program with the chamber. So that it would not be covered in this field trip. That is really, we don't really consider that a field trip because that is part of our curriculum base that we're doing with the chamber, with CTE, and our students in that program actually have the opportunity to go and explore different venues or companies throughout the year, and that is not covered with this because it's really based with the curriculum.
Thank you.
And if you want, I can reiterate some of those questions that
Sure.
Ms. Craybill had. So she said there's no mention of the current practice of only 2 field trips per year being allowed at the principal's discretion. If this is going to remain in place, is this per grade or per school?
Okay, so last year we had a policy where the principals, let me back up. Prior to last year, there was no checks and balances with field trips as far as getting them approved. We talked about this before. You could basically go overnight, do things that we didn't have to be aware of. So what we did was last year we said there are 2 field trips that you're basically just going to make your executive director aware of. After that, we need to have some conversation and make sure they are approved because we literally had some of our schools going on field trips. They were going on maybe 3 field trips or 4 field trips, but one of those field trips might be for 5 days. So we had schools where they were taking students out of the building for about 15 days on field trips. So we wanted to put some checks and balances in place. So we've never had a policy of just 2. We've had a policy after 2, you do need to get approval on that. Having said that, this year we've even changed to say, hey, by October the 1st, give us your field trip plan. So talk with your teachers, talk with your staff, and tell us the field trips that you're going to take for the year. What this does is it allows our principals and our transportation team to plan better with the field trips, with field trips, and it also helps with us identifying the board field trips and the one for coverage. This, of course, there's going to be times where somebody needs to go and they're not on the list. We'll address those as they come. But for the most part, our teachers plan out thematic units basically as they're going, and they'll know the field trips that they're going to take for the most part. So that's kind of how we've adjusted that. So again, there's never been, oh, we can just go on 2 field trips. We do try to keep it to the point where we're not going on a number of field trips, and that was per grade level.
Yeah.
And that didn't count our CLDA field trips like we were just talking about. It did not count anything for chorus. any CTE or anything to that nature.
The next question that she had.
Can I go
did
back
you-
to that?
Oh, go for it.
Well, two things. We have two principals here. Like to hear their input on where we are now. You good with both, with this now?
Yeah, my only question is, Pied Piper is for first grade and second grade, not just first grade, so is second grade not going to attend that? That's one of the arts field trips?
That, remember, everything now is your choice.
Well, but in here it says students in grades 1, 4, and 5 to take one arts-related school trip. The Pied Piper is a first grade, second grade combined arts-related trip. So should that also include second grade?
We only pay for one, so we were talking about funding. So that's why we selected first grade.
Okay.
Because when we looked at funding, and I could go back and look and see, because honestly, we might have some, let me look at funding,
Okay.
and I can get back with you on that.
That's always been a combined.
Yeah, the two of them went together?
Together, yes.
Okay, so maybe that's an error, because I know we were only, we were trying to make it the exact same.
Okay.
So I'll go back and look at that.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Dr. Payson, follow up. Last year, the two field trips you pick, after that approved, caused a lot of confusion among the teachers. What are we doing differently to make the transparency so they all understand the way it is now, so we don't have that initial panic, oh my gosh, we can't have any field trips, and Mason Bar Island isn't, you know, the Explorer program isn't good, all that panic that we had. How are we dealing with it differently this year?
Yeah, and honestly, it's a great question. Honestly, I think doing the plan, because see, now teachers will actually look at their field trips throughout the year, and they'll go ahead and select them and work with their principal. So this will be up front, right? So if I'm a teacher and I want to do, let's say, 3 field trips, right? I'm going to work with my principal October 1st, go ahead and get that looked at and approved. So I think the biggest thing is we wanted to make sure the number of days. We have a couple of field trips that some of our schools go on that are literally 5 days. That's a lot of time out the building. And yes, we do things to the nature, we try to incorporate instruction during that time, but it's still 5 instructional days. So if you do that and then you do 2 or 3 other field trips, I mean, you could be out of the building a half of a month on field trips. So I think the way we're looking at it, and the EDs working with their principals and giving them that autonomy with that plan, is going to address that and help the teachers see that they have that flexibility and autonomy.
I think as we were working with and talking with principals about bringing them more into the process of decision-making, giving them a little more of the flexibility and autonomy to decide what's best for their individual students in their building was the idea of changing this. So it puts a little more control back into the hands of the principals, and communication, obviously, with the EDs.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I move that we adopt it.
There's one more thing
There
I
was
want
one
to
more
clear out that
question,
Ms.
but-
Craybill had asked
Yes,
about.
I will. It said, actually, there's 2, but I think it's not a question, the third thing. It says there's no mention of board-sponsored school trips versus school-sponsored school trips. Is this delineation going away, or is the only delineation who pays for transportation?
It's only transportation now, right? So remember, the board said, hey, we don't want to tell you where to go. You're the experts. You can use this money for transportation to go there. So there are no more board-sponsored field trips because the teachers and the principals had that autonomy to make the suggestion, make the determination. But there are suggestions from their colleagues of, hey, these are some great field trips to go on. And there's happen to be, all of the board field trips are on that suggestion list with some additions. But hear me, principals, you do not have to select those. These are the ones, though, that for the most part, our teachers said are the ones that they thought were great field trips.
Is Starbase one of those?
Yes.
You mentioned, so is that one that the board can pay for the transportation, since it's 5 days?
No, they would not be able to pay
Okay.
for that, no.
Okay.
The transportation, good point, is field trips that are in the county and one-day field trips.
1 day?
One day in the county field
Yeah.
trips, as we've done before.
Okay.
Is there a location we can find the list of the field trips? just for us, for the public, for us to be.
Yeah, so what we were going to do with, once this policy gets approved, the suggested field trips will be shared out, and we can also put that on our curriculum website as well.
Okay.
Could you
Okay.
put it in our portal for the vote for next month, so we see that before we vote on
That's a
this?
great idea, I definitely
Thank you.
will. And the other thing that I want to just highlight, because I know there's been some questions about some things, was the blackout date. So after a certain amount of time, it's spring break, we ask that we do not do any field trips, schedule any selective field trips at that time, right? So that is beneficial for transportation because they have a lot going on, as well as we prepare to do our testing and a number of things going on. So that is basically for our 3 through 12. We ask those, we have that blackout date. That does not affect our CLDA program, our CTE, our athletics or anything. That is, if you are a teacher and a principal looking to do a field trip, we ask that that 6 weeks is not the 6 weeks that you look at throughout the year. That is what that is. The other thing that I wanted to share is that we have actually put in our process, our procedures, and this is not policy, but I know you're going to hear about it, so I want you to be aware of it. We've actually put in our overnight monitoring. That is in our procedures. So when you're taking a student overnight, we feel that you need to have something in place that you are monitoring overnight. These are children. So if you hear about that, that's true. We want to make sure that they are being taken care of and monitoring is occurring throughout the entire time of that field trip. We feel we owe that to our students and we owe that to our parents.
What does monitoring look like?
It has to be something where we have some kind of a plan where we have someone that is up and monitoring throughout the night.
Okay.
Usually as part of a contract, they will hire someone to stay awake all night, who, like, comes in that night, supervises the kids while they're in their rooms and makes sure that everyone sort of stays where they started.
Hall monitor?
Yeah,
Yes.
basically.
Sort of like a hall monitor,
Yeah,
it sounds like.
yeah, it basically, I just think we owe that to our parents and our students, and I mean, I just wanted you to know because I know everybody's not happy about that, because sometimes if they cannot hire, we have to do it ourselves as the educators, but we owe that to our parents and our students.
So you're going to double check on the joint second grade arts
Yes.
trip. With that, did you want to make the motion?
Yes, subject to checking on the Pied Piper second graders. I move that we adopt it as written, and you include those field trip lists for us before we vote
we
next
done.
meeting.
All right, and I will second that. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, passes 3-0. Along with that policy, the next two do not have any changes to be made, but another board member brought forward some concerns that she had heard from a parent. And so I have spoken with Dr. Barnes and Mr. Anderson about some of the transportation-related issues. And so can both of you speak to limited restrictions of distance travel insurance and anything that pertains to international travel?
I'll take a crack at it, Eddie, you correct me when I get it wrong, all right? There are some field trips that are not sponsored necessarily through the school, but do involve our children. The most common example is some high school teachers will sometimes organize a overseas trip through a outside agency. Those, while aren't covered by us, are separate agreements between the parent and that company and aren't what I would consider school sponsored per se. So those wouldn't fall under the same policy in the same way. You're up, Eddie.
So, in terms of, who provides the transportation, So we typically provide transportation in-state on field trips. We have agreements with school districts across the state. So if one of our buses is in Raleigh or Charlotte and it breaks down, they will respond. And we do the same thing for them if they're down here. Now, you know, we'll have agreements with Myrtle Beach or somewhere that's close, but we also have the charter bus approved carrier list. So we have vetted those firms. We have made site visits. We've looked at their drug screening policies, their hiring policies, their safety policies, making sure that they're bonded and insured. And we put that list of those carriers on the website. So if it's a particular trip that they want to use for a sporting event, that's something that's common. I think Hogger did that when they were in the state championship. Or it's a longer field trip. You know, this list has been vetted, and it just expedites the process for the students or schools.
Thank you.
So what distance do we do?
Distance for our vehicles, typically in-state or maybe to Myrtle Beach, somewhere really close by,
You said
somewhere
that, I'm
where we
sorry.
have, yeah.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Any questions? that you
So we
have?
take, no, do we need to vote?
We
Take
don't
no
need to
action?
take any action on those. That was just for clarification and some discussion. Moving on, let's look at the student voice policy. And this was, I have to apologize to the student voice individuals. This was a while ago. I met with some of the student voice representatives and their leader, adult leader. And we just discussed some of the changes that we thought that we could mutually agree upon. So these are some of those changes. There are some things that I think we do need to discuss further as far as, and that was something that we had talked about in the student voice discussion, and it's page 39, 3B, the voting privileges, because we had talked about there are some committees and groups where I'm involved in, and there are students involved in, but they don't have a voting role, and I don't have a voting role. And so I don't know if there's any necessarily committees at this point that we have that would pertain to giving them any kind of permissions to vote. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ms. Bradford?
I agree with you. There's some things here I would like to have discussion about, but more in a working roundtable discussion with our acting superintendent. And I've looked at the language that you've had. If it's necessary that we pass these changes today, we're going to have to go through them one at a time. But I would prefer to lay it on the table and take it up in another meeting with more input from both the kids and the staff and the principals and leadership. More of the whole board, not the whole board, but more
I understand.
discussion.
Additionally, I do want to mention that Ms. Craybill had also asked me to put this on the agenda to ensure that we were consistent as far as removing the Chief Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer from there, since at this point we do not have one. And so that was one of the other things that had come up in discussion. But are you, when we put it on the table, Mr. Krumke, can you clarify what is putting it on the table?
We lay it on the table temporarily, we lay it aside till we can talk about it at another time, but we're not specifying the time because we don't have everybody here to specify. That would be in moving it in a different way. This just lays
Not just holding
see,
it
it's
in
right
a
here.
meeting.
Lay it aside temporarily, lay the question on the table. And if we need to, I am more than willing to,
There's a bunch.
there's a bunch.
But they're very consistent.
but we
It's
could-
just similar changes.
What we could do is say that, for example, D, removing Chief Equity Division, Diversity and Inclusion Officer, to be, every reference there could go ahead and be taken out. We could do that now, move that to the board for next month, for next week and week after, and then come back and deal with it.
Yeah, we can always come back to it,
All
absolutely.
right, so let's, if there's anything else in there that you wanted to,
I think that the other issue that I had mentioned was the voting. And
Yes.
really just,
Yeah.
I think that.
How do you want to do
For me,
that?
I
Just
want to
wanna-
kind of hold off on making any of that specific change until we are absolutely certain, one way or the other, where students would hold any voting role within the committees that we have.
I would agree
as
to
they
that.
are. So I would actually move that we hold it in committee,
The whole thing?
whole thing.
Okay, second?
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye, sorry.
Opposed?
Working on the chart.
That passes 2-0.
All right, this one's me.
Next is policy 2335.
That'd be me.
That would be you.
This is, I brought this to policy because the board asked that we bring it to policy, because I tried to just get it adopted in a organizational efficiency manner. There's 4 things. Minutes, when they're typed, they have page numbers on them. So if you're studying the minutes and it's late and you drop the pack of papers, you can put them back together again quickly at midnight. The documents that are attached to our agendas, they need to have the date when they're prepared or updated. And I'll give you an example. School trips, if you're saving the file school trips, 2024.06, 11, that would have been where it was created, version 2. And then if we make changes to it, it becomes version 3. If we make changes and changes and changes, it follows those out so that the person looking at it instantly knows, I last read V3, so I got to read V4 and 5 now. That's one. And then the agenda review memorandums of understanding, Board Attorney, this applies to you, that the MOUs be prepared and presented to the meeting at least 30 days in advance, because a lot of times we have an MOU in front of us that's not only expired, but there's urgency that we pass it that night, and that puts pressure on me to vote when I haven't been prepared to vote, so that the MOUs be prepared and presented to the meeting 30 days prior to their expiration date, and that the attorney has had a chance to look at them if that is not following a document, a template already prepared by the attorney. So those 2 things, and then, yeah, that's it. 4 things. Pretty simple.
So I wanted to make sure, since I don't think Ms. Crable has joined us at this point, that her commentary and her questions are voiced. So she asked if anybody had talked with Ms. Bowie about the proposed changes, wondered if they were more procedural rather than policy, and suggested that Dr. Barnes could ask the appropriate people on his staff to create procedures. So I did also want to ask, because Ms. Sutton is part of the MOUs as well, so I wanted to kind of ask Dr. Barnes, Ms. Sutton, and our attorney if there's any kind of concerns or any kind of, if this is doable.
Sure, we can certainly build whatever procedures make this cleaner and easier to go through. My only concerns about MOU, and Ashley, you correct me if I'm wrong, there are times that we decide that we want something brought up ahead of that 30-day timeline, just like last month with the MOU with the county and the emergency systems. Or what happens if we cancel an MOU with somebody, and then because we've decided to part ways and need a new MOU with somebody, I don't know if you want to lock yourself down to, this could also slow you down when you wanted to move fast as well.
Well, could we then add language subject to an emergency? I mean, you know,
Probably
I'm not
true.
trying to break the wheel. I'm just trying
No,
to
it makes
make
sense.
it,
Ashley, you work
More
more with MOUs
efficient
than
for
I do.
us.
Tell me what you think.
It's just-
I think with the MOUs, from my perspective, that's probably, I think we can work within the guidelines that you just spoke of. And if the board chooses to move something up because of something that's going on in an emergency situation, then I think the board could just say that, make that decision, and the attorney can help me out with that.
Ms. Bradford, I hear what you're saying. You want to see things ahead of time.
yeah.
What I'm seeing in the 2 months I've been doing this is the ebb and flow of the management team here sometimes doesn't permit that. So my what I wrote down after reading this is what if we can adhere to this and we need something reviewed right away?
Well, I could add subject to emergency. My idea was in giving you months to go is we're dialing your wheel back, but it's not like takes effect immediately.
Yeah.
And when I first wrote this, it was effective November, but it's been a couple of months. So my thought was to give you like 90 days to get caught up. And you know, that means it's not an arduous task to get caught up. Just have to look at them faster. And I know, you know, procrastination's a lovely thing, but it does make it hard to make decisions when you're seeing it for the first time, you know, that night, and you haven't had a chance to look at it. We don't know if he's seen it. I just want to get out of the uncomfortable range. I really do. And it's not transparent either for the public.
And I would say, but I would like to add, so MOUs normally aren't associated with money, so those, I don't see that as a huge hurdle, but other folks on senior staff can talk if they see a concern there. My concern is more on the contract side, when there's money there. It's a year-end issue. So, you know, if we don't have a budget yet for July 1, and the contracts start July 1.
This is just MOU.
Okay.
Just
It
MOU.
says contracts and MOUs. So that
Yeah, I
was the
think it
only
was that
area.
night we got that attorney's contract and we'd not seen it and we were supposed to vote on it in 1 minute. I think that's what drove this. That was
That was a while ago.
it was not a lot of fun.
Right.
I
So
mean,
that
it
would be
help
my
us get on a
concern.
treadmill a little earlier, which
Yeah.
I think makes sense.
So I'm trying to dial you
I
back
think
on that
my
treadmill.
only thing is you just gonna wanna have a caveat in there, because I can think of, from the HR lens, you know, a new teacher arrives. And they are going through their master's degree at a university we don't already have an MOU with. And so sometimes we may wanna accelerate some of those processes just to keep ourselves where we're supporting those employees. But those should be one-offs, those aren't very regular. And those are usually pretty boilerplate anyway. So I think as long as we have some kind of caveat that gives us a little room to move, I don't think any of us would have a problem with getting 30 days ahead of ourselves either.
And I'm fine. I tried to make it procedural, but it got sent to policy to be a policy, and so that's how we got here. I'm fine if you guys say, yeah, we're going to do this, and if we don't have to pass this.
So-
I was just, the will of the board at the time was to move it to here.
I do have a concern, like Ashley mentioned, with contracts. If we're going to leave contracts in there, we tend to start working on contracts because they yearly start July 1, like in the spring. And sometimes vendors won't do that because they can't give us a quote that early. And then it's the negotiating back and forth. So sometimes we don't have a choice. And, you know, it's not intentional. We try really hard because we tried like starting March to get those yearly things done. It's a vendor issue at that point in time, so.
I do get it, although it
Okay.
would be helpful for you to say, look, we have a policy or procedure, whichever it is, it says we have to have this or it has to wait. That puts pressure on them to go ahead and act.
We do, but some of the big vendors really don't care.
True, good point.
But again, we can always bring that to you and say, hey, we're finalizing the negotiations, here's where you're at. That's,
Yeah.
yeah, we can work with that.
So what do you prefer, sir?
A procedure or a policy?
I think a procedure is always easier to work with than a policy, right? I would think the less policies you have, the cleaner it tends to be. But again, this is one that just really details us managing our work effectively, which is important anyway. So I don't think, of all the things I'm losing sleep over currently, this wouldn't be one either way.
Okay, well, then I move that we move it forward, adding, subject to any emergency, to the board and let them decide. We have another week.
Where would that be, that phrasing?
This one's too small for me to read. Nobody does these for older items.
So I'm wondering, reading through that paragraph, it says, contracts and memoranda of understanding will be prepared and presented at the board's regular meeting that occurs at least 30 days prior to the end of the term of the contract and/or MOU that is to be renewed, or 30 days to the beginning of the term. That's a very long sentence.
know, it's not-
Or
I didn't write it. I
30
wrote something
days
else.
prior to the beginning of the term for a new contract and/or MOU, maybe after that, subject to any emergency?
Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
and that gives us a little bit of wiggle room.
Right. Right.
But it does keep it in place if it's a policy for future boards.
So you made that motion, I'm going to second it. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify
Aye.
by saying aye. Aye.
I heard you.
Any opposed? That passes 2-0.
Oh, boy, here we go. Technology.
All right. Next up, Ms. Brinson, it's all you. You have 1, 2, 3, 4.
So initially, policy 3220, technology and education program, and 3225, the technology responsible use, were on the agenda a few months ago for school board association changes, adding the generative AI. And then upon seeing that, felt like it was a good time to review the whole policy and make some changes. Some of the changes are just updating language. Some of the changes are, like the technology and education program, the whole section on student-owned devices and using their own devices. If it's instruction, the district should be providing the tool that they're using, and so we took that whole thing out, because as far as we're concerned, they shouldn't be using their own device for instruction. That's an example of change. I do understand your concern with the wireless communication device. If you looked at it, you noticed we didn't touch anything dealing with cell phones, because I do know that the board was, still having conversations. So if you need to wait on that one, that's perfectly fine. None of these are, timeliness isn't an issue for any of these. There are current policies in place and procedures in place that we're having people do. Once the board actually votes on these policies, I will have to send these policies home for parents to sign anyway, because we are updating them. So just, do I do it now or do I do it later? I'm okay. If you are more comfortable with waiting, I'm fine with that. But it definitely needs to be done, though, in the next few months.
Could you remind us of which ones were there were some NCSBA changes that were from before.
Yes,
So
on
can
the
you
policy
remind-
3220, if you go to, actually it's page 48 in our packet, where it says the generative AI intelligence. Basically, they're just talking about what it is, that it's the tool, and it's, they recommend it being used, the board encourages it being used both by staff and students, but there being some education and PD for staff and education for students. It doesn't go into any specifics. And then in policy 3225, it gets into specifically the PD. Yes, ma'am.
Can we talk on page, let's go back to 45 real quick. Might as well get my questions here on some of this stuff. The first paragraph down towards the end, I think it's the very last sentence. In addition, to the extent funding permits, the board will endeavor to ensure that all students have access to personal digital technology, enable teaching and learning devices, and foster the skills necessary. We heard last week when we heard from teachers that not all kids are one-to-one yet, that not all the technology is being replaced from before we adopted this with ESSER money. And I want to get to the bottom of that. It's not the first time we've heard that. We're not really one-to-one. Only some schools are one-to-one.
That is correct. So before ESSER money, we only had carts in classrooms, and then teachers then signed out and shared at all levels. And then we had the ESSER money came in, and high schools and middle schools, and we just finished middle schools last year, went one-to-one. So all your high schools and middle schools are one-to-one. Now, as far as the schools distributing devices, it takes some time to get those distributed. And then as the numbers change, we have to wait till the numbers in the first 10 days settle before we start doing a lot of moving of devices. So that takes a little bit of time as well, too. Our elementary school, remember, they have basically the hand-me-downs from the high schools and the middle schools. So there are enough laptops at the elementary schools for grades 3 through 5. There are iPads, and we have to verify the numbers, but we believe there's enough iPads also for K2. There may be a couple of places that we may have to move, I hear, an iPad up for 3-5, just depending on how the numbers change from what we thought they were going to be last year to what they actually are this year.
Wow. Okay. And some of them said that, they don't have smart boards and so on. Where are we with all of that?
That is correct. So the actual new line boards that we were putting up as part of the ESSER funds We are trying to find funding sources. You'll see it again coming in capital, some additional, asking for funding both for the devices and the board. So we are still applying for grants, looking for any way we can to continue the funding. But that was also part of ESSER funds, which we don't have anymore.
So the vote to go one-to-one just didn't have enough money to make it district-wide. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Well, I think it's also a question of student age and availability and understanding. You know, K2 and iPad is a more responsive device for kids of that age. So when you say one-to-one, I think you have to be cautious about how far down that goes as well, because I think it ages with the kid and responsibility. Elementary principals, that makes sense?
Yeah, and I don't think we asked which teachers, what grade you taught when they were talking to us, so I don't have that delineation.
Well, but if you're looking at number of devices and number of students, there will be a discrepancy just because of that.
Well, and you ask most of our K2 teachers, they do have a tub of iPads, but they don't necessarily want an iPad for every kid. It's just not, doesn't really align with what they're
I
doing
agree.
in the classroom.
I agree. I'm asking because we're getting those comments, and I don't know where we stand, and I think everyone else wants to know that too.
Having that clarification.
46, bottom of the page, that's going to be the last thing under A, just above B, and in accordance with the district hardware adoption plan. Where's our district hardware adoption plan?
That is something new that's added that we are going to have in place. It is not in place right now. They are working on that process.
Okay.
Do we have a time frame for?
I will check and let you know.
Okay.
And all the language under C that's in red, but it's struck.
Yeah.
That, I understand why we're doing it, but who did it?
That was me.
Okay, all right.
And by committee. I'm
Because it's
sorry,
not
just me.
normally
I have-
red and then struck, because
Yes, I
red
have-
means it's new, somebody added it, but then it's red struck, which means somebody struck it. So I was just
Oh,
trying
you're
to-
right. It shouldn't have been in red. I apologize for
It's
that.
okay.
That is on me.
It's okay. And then, I think that's it of all these notes, but yeah, on page 49, where it's talking about the professional development involving the training of generative AI, including the impact, I have all these reservations about AI. I've been studying and listening. So when are we going to be training our professionals on AI? Do we know?
So, yes, so at the September board meeting, I have some people that are coming to do a presentation for the board on our procedures that we have, our stance that we have, and the guidelines that we have created, our AI guidelines, the PD plan, as well as the implementation plan. So that's going to be at the September board meeting.
Agenda
We-
review next
Huh?
week? Next week's
Yes,
agenda?
I'm sorry,
Okay.
agenda review, I apologize, yes. So we have the guidelines, we've taken those to teachers for their approval, we've shared them with principals for their approval, so that way there would be comment stuff. Basically, we're taking them to the board then and, to get your approval or, comments on them. Then the PD is starting. There's actually a AI summit that they're doing actually Friday at Myrtle Grove, where they're doing some workshops for teachers on AI. At this point, we're working on tools for the teacher. A lot of it's like personal tools, how to make their job a little bit easier and help them. Then we're going to get towards the instructional piece. Right now, our stance is that the generative AI, like what ChatGPT that you hear, is used at the high school level, because a lot of those things, when you read the terms and conditions, say 13, and above. So our stance is that we're not using those types of tools at the middle school, only at the high school level. But there's more to it than just that.
Madam Chair, can we indulge, since we have two of our favorite principals right here in the room, to get comment from them on this? Little advance comment, please.
Like specifically comment on.
This, all,
Like the AI?
yeah, all the AI.
Yeah, I think starting with like what she's saying, the summit, and looking at the teacher piece and like what are the things, because not all of the teachers are necessarily aware of like the ways that it could make their job a little easier, and especially like being at the elementary level, like focusing on that first. And then it sounds like with like a PD plan, and things as far as like rolling it over into like how we're using this with students. to
Yeah,
me,
well,
that makes more sense, and starting
Yeah.
with like, okay, these are, because a lot of the teachers have not really explored the same level as other teachers.
And some teachers don't understand that Google Maps has AI in it.
Mhm.
So we've been using AI. It's
Even
a
just Googling
different
something.
form of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
AI, yeah. So at the elementary and middle school level, the predominantly what the training is going to be and stuff that we want them to do with students is basically how to recognize that AI has been used. Because that's key. Even when you're doing the generative AI, you kind of need to look at, and especially images, when you see images out there, how are those altered? So that's would be the biggest piece for elementary and middle schools. How do you recognize that it actually has been used? So that's a lot of the training that we're going to be doing for elementary and middle school teachers, but that's not initially.
And the summit you're having is going to talk about the dangers in this as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I think the first step towards that, because I know what you're concerned about, is getting teachers and principals to understand and have awareness of what it does and how it impacts both negatively and positively the
Yeah, it
work.
scares me.
Yep. So there is, we did reach out to teachers and ask them to be part of what we're calling AI ambassadors, and those that we meet with on a regular basis. They are the ones that are our guides, kind of as we're going through this. We run everything by them, we get suggestions from them, so that way what we're doing is actually we're making sure we're meeting the needs of the teachers. And we also are using the state's guidelines. DPI had presented their guidelines, so we're kind of looking at what they have, as well as all the resources that they have provided, and making sure that we're incorporating the best parts and pieces of those into our guidelines.
I don't know if you're aware, but there's a move in the state to, actually dust off some textbook and take the screen time down for our students instead of up.
I don't disagree with you. Not everything should be done on the screen. I think they're definitely, as a math teacher, paper and pencil to me is the best way to do math. So I don't disagree with you. That shouldn't be on the screen, every day, all day long. They should be paper and pencil.
I think the
conversating.
long-term effects on our eyesight, I work on a screen all day long, and sometimes by midnight, when I'm trying to read policy on page 93 of 123, my eyes just won't focus anymore. And I've got all the blue this, and, I'm doing the best I can with it, but I don't want kids in classrooms all day long with their eyes on screens, especially not in pre-K and K.
And
elementary.
they're definitely not in pre-K because they can't, and I don't believe they are.
Well, they are at home,
Well,
you see babies.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't.
Newborns with a
But
phone in
also,
their hand.
I think this is a good example of the difference between a digital native and a digital immigrant. We learn technology, but we didn't grow up with technology. And our children these days, this is something I want to applaud Dawn and her team for getting ahead of this, because this is happening, right? Whether we want it to be a part of our school system or not. I wonder about every term paper that's going to be turned in from now on. So I think that, it's a double-edged sword. I hand my VCR to my kid when it doesn't work, but also I can read a map, right? So it's one of those questions of how do we get ahead of where our students are, which I think is a significant concern as well.
Well, and I will say, just to, kind of piggyback on that, I spent a large chunk of our opening meeting day yesterday sorting Eureka and Wit and Wisdom workbooks with our teachers. And so they are getting, with those curriculums, they are getting a lot of paper pencil. I lived that yesterday. Yeah.
So that was a fun day.
Yeah. So it's a good balance, that's
good.
happening.
You haven't spoken yet, ma'am.
I think with AI, it really is about helping teachers understand the capabilities and not to be afraid of AI in education and all of the opportunities that it can provide for students and teachers. Like there's a lot that can be done, and there's a lot of products out there that are available to teachers for free that will really revolutionize their planning, their instruction. But I think it's a matter of providing professional development for teachers so that they know how to use it and how not to use it.
Okay. So I'm going to make a motion to move policy 3220 onto the board. Do I hear a second?
Hold on. Which one's 3220? This one?
Yeah, that's the one we were just, I don't want to go through and do them all as a lump. I want to do them individually because I think that there's important things.
Okay.
So-
Hold on. I thought we were talking about,
No, you were on 3220 that whole time.
Okay, so you're proposing to take 3220 forward?
Yes.
Okay. Don't want to, yeah, I'm okay with that.
So do I hear a second?
Yeah.
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes 2-0.
Probably not going to do that with some of these others. That's okay.
So policy.
And that's
three-
first reading, so we will have a
Yes.
second reading on it.
Yes,
no, that-
yes,
is
and we
that a first?
actually, I would
That's not a new one.
require that to happen for actually specifically this next policy, 3225, because in order for us to get E-rate funding, we have to make sure we have a responsible use policy, and part of that requirement is that the policy is out there and open for public comment. So specifically, 3225 would have to do first reading and second reading. just to give
Typically,
us
we
an
do that
opportunity.
for new policies, though.
Correct, and I know it's a change, but I still would like to, just so I can say I'm meeting the letter of the law, I
So
don't
to
want to
abide
risk
by
any
the-
E-rate funding.
So for 3220 that we just passed.
That one doesn't have to, but 3225, I would require it to actually go through first and second.
Yeah, that would make me a lot more comfortable.
Okay. So 3225, a lot of those were also NCSBA changes, correct?
No, a lot of them.
Well, there was a fair
There
amount.
was that one section, yeah.
Yeah.
When you get to the section on page,
It's a long one.
it would be G on the use agreements.
What page?
That would be page 58. And forgive me, on the formatting, so I was struggling with getting the formatting set, so when you track changes, it wants to, do the underlining and the highlighting and changing the color, and it was very difficult for me to try and get different colors for the School Board Association of Students and what I was doing. So that's why everything is red versus being multiple colors. But under G, use agreements, it's on page 58, specifically where it talks about the AI. And at that point is when it's talking about the guidelines being developed and that the guidelines are
Consent.
shared with staff and students and families, and that there must be, the acceptable use policy needs to be signed by parents as well as by students and staff saying that they're going to follow the policies and procedures.
Okay, I have a couple of things to bring up on this one, and it's really addressing language in two places,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken. But, so if I see something read and struck through, that's just because you were challenged by the technology, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right, good. But where we talk about, for example, on 56, that top paragraph, it uses the word obscene and pornographic. And as we came through the book hearing, we found out that words that the courts look at are pervasively vulgar, sexually explicit, educationally unsuitable, not aligned with standard course of study. So I think they're in here twice, and I would suggest that we not use the word obscene and pornographic, but one that is more recognized in the law in the state of North Carolina. And pervasively vulgar, sexually explicit, educationally unsuitable, and aligned with standard course of study are language from the state General Assembly.
Okay.
So, and I believe it's two places. I know there's that one. It's in here somewhere else. I know
Yeah,
I had.
I do remember what you're talking about. I'll find that.
Okay, you can search and replace. So those are my big concerns here with this one, and then the next one I just go off the rails on. Sorry.
Do you know where the other mention of that is? What page?
And it may be in the other, well, no, it's on 52. Sorry, it's right here in front of me. Yep, number 4. Obscene and pornographic are right there. And you have illicit acts in here. I've never looked up illicit acts too much. I just played around with it yesterday, but I hope somebody knows what that means. And has the definition of it. Why did you strike what was 6 on bottom of 52, now 5. Why did you strike that about firewalls?
Because it only dealt with the use of anonymous proxies to circumvent content filtering. That's what was there before.
Okay.
And there's more than just proxies that we need to worry about. That's why we changed it to circumvent network security measures, and then we gave the example of firewalls.
And the same thing in 3. Is that just replacement language, what you struck? Is it somewhere else covered?
Yes, and we kind of felt, our goal of this one, it was so long. We were trying to shorten the policy as much as we could and condense stuff. So we felt like with the school standards and rules, you already said the law, board policies, administrative regulations. We were going under the fact that administrative regulations isn't just district administrative, it's school administrative, and that would cover the school standards and rules.
Okay. I think I'm okay.
All right, so I would move that we move this onto the board for a first reading.
Second, I can
Right.
second that.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And that is 3225 et al., right?
Passes 2-0, yes.
3225, 4312, and 7320.
Yes. Next policy up is 3226, 4205, internet safety. And there were no, this was not NCSBA changes,
No,
these were
it was
yours.
not.
So, okay.
I would
and it wasn't-
move that we hold this and for discussion. You please talk to it, but I believe this needs more conversation between a lot of people before we go ahead and.
So, Ms. Brinson, what are your,
So on the first page, on page 62, of course, we changed, got rid of World Wide Web. It was just old term. And then under E, initially where it talked about, it said, under education, supervision, and monitoring, to the extent practical, steps will be taken to promote safety and security of the school system's online computer network, especially when they are using electronic mail. It had chat rooms, instant messaging, and other forms of direct electronic communication. We changed it to online communities and collaboration tools because chat rooms and instant messaging is so specific. We felt like a general term would be better there. So that's where we changed that. And then on that third paragraph on that same page, as far as when it talks about the actual training for the students, we kind of changed it so it's the district we provide the tool. We purchased Neptune Navigate for the students, but it's the school's responsibility to have a plan and make sure that they kind of fulfill sending that out. So that's all, we're trying to make that clarification there.
and Ms. Brinson, you and I had a really good discussion about the Neptune navigation. Could you just explain a little bit what that looks like, what that means, like what do students have to do for that?
Yeah, so that is a tool that we've purchased. It has different modules. We've gone through and identified the appropriate modules at different grade levels for students to have to do. At grades, definitely middle school and high school, it's kind of self-paced. We ask that they get it done within the first 30 days, of the school to getting issued your device. It doesn't take very long. In elementary school, usually the media specialist delivers that content because they can just do a better job and make it more appropriate for their specific kids at their school. What we'd like to do is that does have an assessment piece to it, so kids at the end of the modules do an assessment. If they don't get 80%, it redirects them back to more instruction. So we mark out that last paragraph on page 63 because we're trying to figure out how to manage that. So we felt like we are enrolling the students in the program automatically, so they don't have a choice, so they'll get that piece of it. And then there is the assessment, so that would cover the fact that they, and they have to get an 80 or better, so that would cover the fact that they understood what they were receiving in the training. And then policy 3225 requires the statement, it has a statement as far as that the student is going to adhere to and follow the rules of, policy 3225, which that's just a repeat of that.
And I know that we had also talked about this, and at our last regular meeting for the agenda review, we had heard about all of the
Yes.
the legal issues that can come up when it comes to some of the rules that kids aren't necessarily aware of, the severity of. Can you speak to how much of that is included in the assessment?
Unfortunately, the Neptune Navigate doesn't cover the new state rules. That will definitely, and I know there was conversation about integrating that in with the health and PE class. So that will still need to be kind of done that way. This is more about, once they're online, the safety of that piece of it. There are modules and information for parents along with, that we do have online for parents. And there's actually, I've had Dr. Hudson create accounts for each board member if you'd like to have an account so you can see what the kids are doing, so you can see the content, so that can be done as well. We've even created the accounts for each principal and assistant principal so they can see what's there as well. There's also training in there for staff.
Okay. The content on page 61 that was already here, there are no changes to it, but I would like to put, I will move to accept the changes here, send it on to the board, but I'd also move to bring it back, maybe not next meeting, but the following one, to discuss these definitions here. And I'm going to speak very candidly. We talk about inappropriate material here. We talk about harm to minors, pictures, image, graphic image file, visual depiction, nudity, sex, and so on. A lot of the books that we have in our schools have these things in them now. We've never addressed this, but now we're going to digital where you can violate the law and be busted for it. So I really want to come back and look at this. I've got a year and 7 months into this. I had looked at all those books at one time, and some of it is just inappropriate for the age of the child. We shouldn't be having books for kids to read that have incest in them, and it's going to violate this policy right here. So now that we're making this policy go to internet, and we're going to be bound by the state laws, we really need to look at this.
Okay, I'm not disagreeing with you about what you want to do about the books, but this policy only talks about the internet. So the
But
fact
all
that
of our books are on the internet now.
No, not all of them. There's still a lot of books in the library as well. But I understand what you're saying about the
Yeah.
online books, yes.
Yeah.
All right, so you're saying to move this forward to the board, and I will second that, and I have it written on here to do that. Any further discussion?
No.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
All right.
That passes.
3226. And is that one that needs a second reading?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
All right. Next, 4318.
Yeah, the only part that we took out of this was basically where teachers can authorize students to use their personal device for instruction, because they feel like they shouldn't be using their personal device in instruction. The district should provide what they need. Didn't make any other changes because we knew that the board was, having a conversation and wanted to look at the cell phones.
And under that first paragraph, Bluetooth and pods and earbuds and all that's covered, right? Any type of electronic device that they're listening to is covered in that language, right? The watches, everything. Correct?
Wireless
I
communication.
love that.
Yes.
Two-way radios.
Oh,
Yes.
Two-way radios. Who uses those anymore?
I don't know, we might have to.
Any other questions? Do we want to hold this in policy, or do we, for further discussion until we have an opportunity to gather more information from principals and
What we could
teachers?
do is what we just do, pass this so she's got this paragraph, and then put it back on, put it right back on. Ms. Princeton, I have one more question at the bottom of page 66. Item 3, where it says send illicit text messages. Do we want to change that to, it was illegal and we changed it? I mean, is there a
No,
reason
it's
for that?
changed back to illegal. It's not illicit, it's changed to illegal on mine.
Well, no, number 3 is send illicit
on the
text
top of
messages.
Yeah, and then number
67,
4, we
Number
changed
four.
it to
6
illegal,
at the
yeah, so
bottom.
they need to be the same. So
Okay,
yes, we
gotcha.
can change it to illegal.
Yeah.
If that's the best term to have, then yes.
Yeah. Okay, with that change, I move that we send it forward to the board without a second reading, However, we put it back on either next month or the month after. It might take us that long to get more public input on cell phones
All right, and I will
or
second that.
technology.
Yes, I will second that. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, passes 2-0.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Brinson, for all of your hard work and for your willingness to meet with me and discuss it. So the next two are policies for second reading. We saw these at our last meeting, and these are just, there were no changes, just second reading, correct, Ms. Farnham? I believe these were under your purview, correct? So, did you have any further questions? or
I
we-
do not.
Okay.
I do not.
So I move that we send forward 4140 for second reading. Do I hear a second?
Second?
All right, all those in, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 2-0. And then policy 5023, 6128, and 7268. Were there any questions you had about that?
I do not.
Okay, and there were no other changes. So I move that we send that forward to the board for second reading. That would be policy 5023, 6128, 7268. Do I hear a second? Second. All right, all those, any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 2-0. Sorry. Writing things. That's what I did. All right, so, next, we have the substantive changes from NCSBA, starting with 4203, 7233.
What page is that on?
70.
70?
There we go. Thank you.
So for these, let me just make sure that I am getting all of the changes in here that were made. I'm going to read it upside down, apparently. So for 4023 and 7233, it was revised to comply with new Title IX regulations. Here's, are the changes to Title IX or the recent news information related to that, is that going to change anything within policy 4023 and 7233?
I don't believe it would. I think this deals mainly with the lactating students, and I don't see the fight being over those issues.
And generally, this just requires us to follow the Title IX law, so we don't have to change it every time the Title IX law changes, but that's where the rub of the issue is anyway, so.
Yeah. All right.
And is this a first reading?
This is not. This is just substantive changes
Okay.
from NCSBA related to Title IX. So were there any other questions that you had, Ms. Breaker?
Does anybody want to talk, I mean, have we talked about it? Do we want to talk to it?
Is this would be HR or you?
It's sort of all of us.
All of us. Is there any commentary that either of you? Okay.
Not
I would
really,
normally
because
be
it
looking
really-
at you, but.
Yeah, right. But, hey, Jen. It really speaks to our ability to make sure we're treating students and
And staff,
providing them
yeah.
the opportunity to a free and public education. So
Okay.
there's not much that we have to worry about there.
Okay. So I would move that we send this forward to the board.
Second?
All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 2-0. Ones with multiple numbers. All right. Next is 4329. 7311. And that is bullying and harassing behavior prohibited.
Yeah, I think it's awesome that we're talking about it, but we need to talk about some enforcement.
And then the changes on that were, find them, there. Language regarding the applicability of the policy was updated. Information was changed to reflect the changes to other policies in the update, and cross-references were updated on that. Is there any questions that you have, Ms. Bradford?
No, I think it's great that we're gonna, use of school technology is added into this, you know, especially after last agenda review, hearing from the assistant district attorney. So it's good. I wish we could have a bigger bullying and harassing, behavior prohibited discussion. And I think that falls under discipline.
Yeah, and I think
I just
that-
want to get that in there somewhere.
Yeah, I
Soon.
think also we could, like, that can fall under some of that safety discussion as
Yeah.
well. So,
Right.
so I move that we move this forward to the board.
Second.
All right, any discussion? And that's policy 4329/7311. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes 2-0. Yes, ma'am.
On to the other one, just beyond 4329. What I'll do in your memo for this week is provide for you the standard operating procedure that our staff and administrators use to address bullying claims and to move through that investigation process. It's very detailed, so I'll make sure you have that as you're preparing for any discussion you'll have in the future.
Thank you.
Have we had those wonderful little updates in the last couple of weeks and I've missed them?
I'll have to defer that to Dr. Barnes.
I keep sending them to you every week, but.
Okay, but it's not the link with her.
No,
Yeah,
but I
okay,
can.
It's fine, it's fine.
yeah.
I just want to make sure
There
I
used to be a
hadn't
very
missed.
long document.
I actually got
Still
used to
there,
looking
and
at
I
those.
sent it for the one for this past week. All of that link is still live, and mine are all still there. I'll add this one to it, but
Yeah,
I did
just send
send
it to
one
me.
this week.
Yeah, I got used to looking at it and then being able to look forward.
Yeah.
And so I, not to complain at all.
No,
I
just trying to get my head
wondered
above water.
If it was coming in another way and I was missing
Yeah.
it.
Getting
It-
I
that-
like what you're doing too, don't get me wrong.
You can actually go back to a previous memo and click
Yeah.
on that link, and that link is still live. It's a running record.
So
on
it'll
mine.
just
love
show up, the
that.
updated
Yeah.
will show
Yes.
up.
No, it's a good thing.
All right. The next one is, I have 1510, 4200, and 7270. That's my next
School
one.
safety.
School safety. And the changes to that,
There's a bunch of red. Who did this?
so this is NCSBA. So a provision was added to section D3 regarding training on recognizing and reporting threats. A new section E was added to address the statutorily required threat assessment teams. Information was changed to reflect the changes to other policies in the update. Legal references and other resources were updated, and cross-references were updated. So those were the changes from NCSBA.
It's a ton.
It is.
So, do you want me to speak a little bit about this
I would
one?
Go for it.
Ms.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
especially about section E.
Page by
Yeah.
page. of the
Okay,
red
page
ones.
by page, okay.
Of the big red ones.
I'm gonna give you the bulk. The bulk of this is specific to House Bill 605 that became session law in the General Assembly, that it specifically establishes threat assessment teams. In New Hanover County Schools, we're probably about as close to compliance with new law with our standard practices related to threat assessment, probably as close as any district in the state. I, along with others on our team, attended a session this summer with DPI at the Safe and Civil Schools Summit on kind of an overview of what this new law means. And one of the sections in the law is that the governing body of a public school unit shall develop policies for assessment and intervention by threat assessment teams. So basically what we're finding in policy here is articulating what was put into general statute in Session Law 2023-78. So we have been ready for this and prepared for this. We just needed to see it in policy, and we are waiting to be assigned I think a 6 to 8 hour training session with DPI. They are only just now making this available to us, which might have been a little bit of a concern that I shared as this goes into effect for this school year. But we do feel that basically the structure that we have had in place regarding threat assessment teams, and I believe our administrators would be able to speak to what their process is in the event they need to use a threat assessment protocol. So we'll just be providing a few tweaks to our process, and the one thing that will be new is an oversight team at the district level. So we're ready. We just needed to see the policy go into place, and I don't have any concerns on how it's written.
With that in mind, our wonderful two principals that are here, what are your, Ms. Farnham mentioned you, so I'm going to
Read the red on
defer
91.
to your,
My apologies.
no, we want your feedback for sure, as far as threat assessment teams, what that looks like.
Take this one first.
I do
Sorry.
want to mention, 2 elementary principals are going to have less involvement with this, but it's not going to change, and our protocol hasn't
Like-
changed in 2 or 3 years.
I think really, when it does come up, thankfully, it is, few and far between. The biggest thing is there's a team of us, but no one on the team is acting without the consultation of everyone on the team, and myself being the main person on the team, obviously, even if I'm not, if I'm in an observation or, I'm doing something, counselor, social worker, everyone's
But you're readily
involved,
available, yeah.
but the communication happens among everyone. But thought she made me go first.
What he said.
So basically, we have a drafted standard protocol that they just go on to, like our hub, grab it and operate that, and our counselors and social workers are also trained on that.
And is that available for board members to see as well, or?
I can share it with you, but it is not available to the general public because
Gotcha.
it's an assessment tool that
Okay.
ensures safety. So I can
figured.
share it, but it would not need to be shared beyond.
Okay.
If only we had a weekly memo. Yeah, right.
Seriously,
In your spare time, sir,
only.
between 2 and 3 in the morning.
So I'm going to move that we put this forward to the board. Do I hear a second? All right. This is policy 1510, 4200, 7270. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It passes 2-0. The last set of changes from NCSBA, and if you look at the updates from there, they all have the exact same reasoning for the changes.
Don't have that same language written.
They all have references to other policies were updated, and that is for all of the policies listed. So
They all say
1300.
discrimination and grievance
Right.
procedures.
So
pretty much.
1300, 1500, 1600, 1700, 1742, 5060, 1760, 7280, 2500, 4040, 7310, 7335, and 7820. Were there any, with being minor changes related to references, were there any questions or concerns?
Only that it's too much in one board meeting.
Well-
But I know we missed the board meeting, so we're playing makeup. But it's a lot to digest in 2 or 3 sittings.
Yeah, I made the assumption, which is not always the best to do, that because they were minor, that we could.
Maybe we should have some sort of stipulation. If it's under 100 pages, we have to have it 3 days in advance. But if it's more than 200 pages, we have to have it 6 days in advance.
Realize how many pages it was.
Depending on, the size of the phone book you're giving out for us to study.
So I would like to make a motion that we vote on
The
all
block.
of those at once.
I'm making sure I don't have any ink marks on any of them. And I don't appear to.
Okay?
Oh, I'm on a German page.
Ooh, that's a good page. So I'm going to make a motion that we group all of those together and vote on those together. I hear a second?
Yes, second.
All right, any discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, passes 2-0. And then my next motion would be to move all of these to the board for approval.
Yes, second. Can we package them as a group, like, almost like a consent for this staff?
That would be, yes, that would be great.
That would save a lot of time if we did.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 2-0. That is all that we have for today, ladies and gentlemen. So, do I hear a motion to adjourn? And I will second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And we are adjourned. Thank you all.